The inquiry room aboard the Salt Spire had no windows. That was deliberate. Commander Haldvey understood it the moment the Marines walked him through the bulkhead and seated him at a steel table that had been bolted to the deck since the war started. A windowless room made it easier to forget that there was a war at all. It made it easier to look a man in the face and decide whether to put a round behind his ear or pin a medal to his collar, and to do either without thinking about the weight of the stars outside. The recording lamp was already lit when the panel filed in. 3 flag officers in dress grace, a fleet judge advocate in black, and a stenographer who would not look at him. Vey kept his hands flat on the table. He had not slept in 31 hours. The bandage on his left palm itched. He did not scratch it. The judge advocate cleared her throat. Commander Vey, state for the record that you understand the charges. I understand the charges, Vey said. You are accused of mutiny in time of declared war. You are accused of relieving Captain Roar Kestrel of command of the Terran Battlecruiser Iron. Verdict at 0340 hours yesterday. You are accused of refusing the firing order issued at 0352 hours. You are accused of disabling the bridge ignition key and locking your captain in his own ready room for a period of 11 minutes. She paused. The stenographer's fingers moved. Outside, far above the inquiry room, the slow grind of the spire's docking ring was the only sound the bulkheads admitted, and that sound came through as a low hum, like a bowed string drawing across the bones of the station. Do you understand? The judge advocate said that the penalty for each of these charges taken alone is death by firing squad. I understand, Vey said. Do you understand, she said more quietly, that the choir is gone? He did not answer that. He kept his hands flat on the table and watched the recording lamp until it stopped meaning anything. The room was quiet for a long time. Then, the rear admiral on the left, a man named Croft, whom Vey had served under a decade ago when nobody had heard of the choir, said very softly, "Walk us through it, Commander. Start from the moment the second packet came in." Vey opened his mouth. He thought he was going to say something about doctrine, or about the weight of an order, or about Captain Kestrel's record, which had been the finest in the fleet until the loss at Brevet. But none of those things came out. What came out instead was this: I was in the wardroom. We had been at silent running for 6 hours. Kestrel had just cracked the seal on the Alpha packet, and then the comm officer came down the ladder, and her face was the wrong color, and she said the Bravo packet had finally come in. The recording lamp flickered. Vey closed his eyes for a second. The wardroom had smelled like cold coffee and the static of the auxiliary scrubbers. He could still see it. He could still feel the deck shift under his boots when the iron verdict adjusted attitude. He could still hear Kestrel breathing, the slow, controlled breathing of a man who has already decided. He opened his eyes and began. 6 hours earlier, the iron verdict had been a ship that did not officially exist. She ran silent across the back arc of the Mira Vale, 212 crew aboard, a hull weathered black by 11 months of unreplenished combat, her flanks marked with the scorched lines of a war the colonies were losing. She was not the largest ship in the fleet. The class battlecruisers had been built in a quiet shipyard above Old Ganymede during a brief and ugly recession, and there were only 6 of them, and 3 of those 6 were already gone. The iron verdict was the 4th, and she was on a mission that her officers had been ordered to forget the moment it ended. The mission had no name in any open channel. The crew called it the Long Quiet. They had been ordered to thread the Mira Vale at 0 acceleration for 96 hours, to coast on the residual heat of a dying gas giant, to come in behind the choir's command spawn without lighting a single active sensor. They were to wait. They were to listen. They were to crack the Alpha packet when the spawn moved into firing range, and they were to do what the packet told them to do. Nobody on the verdict knew what the Alpha packet said, not even the captain. That was the rule. The Wrought ships had been built around it. The Alpha packet sat in a sealed black drum mounted to the deck of the captain's ready room, keyed to 2 thumbprints, the captain's and the executive officers, and it would not open without both of them present and both of them sober and both of them willing to turn the key. There was a Bravo packet, too, somewhere in the long, thin chain of Fleet Command, and it would be cut and sent by relay only if Fleet had cause to amend the Alpha order. The Bravo packet might arrive. The Bravo packet might not. The rule was that the Alpha packet was the order until the Bravo packet replaced it, and the Bravo packet replaced it only if both packets were present together in the captain's hand. Vey had read about the protocol when he was a cadet. He had thought then that it was a beautiful piece of engineering. He had thought that it was a way to make sure that no human ship ever, would commit an irrevocable act on the strength of a single voice on a single channel. He had thought that the people who built it had loved the fleet. He had not understood then what would happen if the Bravo packet was late. Captain Rohr-Kestrel had been the youngest officer to make full captain in the fleet since the war began. He had taken the iron verdict at her commissioning, and he had not given her up through the loss of half her sister ships. He was 41 years old, ash blonde, narrow at the jaw, a man who walked the corridors at a steady, measured pace and never raised his voice on the bridge. He had earned the Stellar Cross at Brevet Station. He had earned it by ordering the destruction of a colony evacuation transport that he had reason to believe had been seeded by Quire vector spores, and that the colony evacuation transport had in fact been so seeded had been confirmed 8 hours later, and the medals had been pinned, and Captain Kestrel had not spoken of it for 3 years. The crew did not call him disgraced. The fleet did not. The news feeds did when they were sure he was not listening. The news feeds said the cost of his cross had been 4,011 civilian lives, and the news feeds were not wrong about that, but they were wrong about everything that came after. Vey had been Kestrel's executive officer for 2 years. He had watched the man read the names of those 4,011 civilians every night, in alphabetical order, 10 pages at a time, on a folded sheet of paper that he kept in his ready room safe. He had watched the man do this on watches when the rest of the crew thought he was asleep. He had watched the man do this on the night before they accepted the long, quiet mission, and he had watched him do it on the morning the Alpha packet was bolted to the deck, when the seal on the drum was finally cracked. 6 hours before the inquiry room, Captain Rohr-Kestrel had been the most disciplined officer the fleet still had on its active rolls. There were many people that morning who would have said he was also the most dangerous. The wardroom was 3 decks below the bridge. The Iron Verdict's wardroom had been a captain's gallery in the original design, and there were still old gilt fittings on the bulkheads where someone had stripped down the panels for armor. The deck was scarred. A faulty scrubber breathed sour air every 90 seconds. 6 chairs around a steel table. A coffee urn that nobody trusted anymore. When Vey came through the hatch, Kestrel was already seated at the head of the table, with the drum open in front of him and a single folded sheet of flimsy in his hand. He did not look up. He nodded at the chair across from him, and Vey sat. The flimsy was Alpha. "Read it," Kestrel said. Vey took the flimsy. He read it once, he read it twice, he read it a 3rd time. He had been an officer long enough to know what he was reading, and he had been an officer long enough to know that there are orders that the body refuses before the mind catches up. The Alpha packet ordered the Iron Verdict to fire the Singularity Lance. The Singularity Lance was the reason the Wrought ships had been built. It was not a weapon that any other class in the fleet carried. It was not a weapon that Fleet Command admitted to in any open hearing. It was a one-shot device mounted along the keel of the ship, and it did one thing. It crushed the heart of a yellow main sequence star and released the result. It was not a weapon for ships. It was a weapon for systems. It was a weapon for the Quire, who lived in the gravity shadows of suns, and who had built their command spawn deep inside the corona of a star designated Veilate. The Alpha packet ordered Kestrel to fire the lance at Veilate, at the next coronal maximum, and to keep firing until the star tore itself open, which it would do in approximately 110 seconds. That would end the Quire's command spawn. Fleet projections suggested it would also end the war within 60 days. It would also, in the same moment, ignite the system's outer atmospheric shell. The Quire lived inside that shell. There were 2 billion Quire voices inside that shell. That was an estimated number. The drum did not give a number. Vey supplied the number himself because he had read the briefings and because he was the kind of officer who supplied numbers when no one else would. He folded the flimsy. "You understand the order," Kestrel said. "I understand the order," Vey said. "Sit," Kestrel said, though Vey was already sitting. The captain put his hands on the table, palms down the way Vey had put his hands on the inquiry table 6 hours later. Kestrel's wedding band caught the light. His wife had died in the 2nd year of the war. The band stayed. "We have 4 hours and 20 minutes to coronal maximum," Kestrel said. "I want the lance pre-charged. I want secondary capacitors flushed. I want the ignition key checked twice. I want the bridge cleared except for primary watch. We will fire on my mark." Vey nodded. He did not stand up. He did not leave. He sat with his hands folded over the flimsy, and he looked at his captain, and he tried to think of the right thing to say to a man who had been carrying 4,011 names in his pocket for 3 years and was now being asked to add 2 billion. He was still thinking when the comm officer came down the ladder. Lieutenant Sabra Innes was 24 years old. She had been one of those colony evacuation children that the news feeds did not talk about anymore, and she had been pulled out of a hold by a Marine on the day Kestrel had ordered the transport destroyed, and she had requested to serve under Kestrel specifically the moment she made commissioned rank. They had asked her once why she had done that, and she had said, because somebody needed to, and she had not elaborated. Innes came through the hatch at a run. She was not running fast. She was running the way you ran when the ship was at silent stations, and you could not raise your voice. Her face, as Vey would later tell the inquiry, was the wrong color. Sir, she said, Bravo packet, Kestrel did not move. You're certain, he said. Burst came in 9 seconds ago, sir. Authenticated, single relay, it's Bravo. Read it, Kestrel said. Innes did not have it in her hand. She had it on a slate, and she set the slate on the table between them, and she stepped back. The screen was a single block of text. Vey leaned forward, so did Kestrel. The Bravo packet said this. Fleet Intelligence had revised its estimate of the Choir Command spawn. The spawn was confirmed inhabited by Command Tier Choir, as expected. The spawn was also confirmed to be holding, in stasis pods anchored to the inner radiance shell, a population of human captives taken from the brevet evacuation. The estimated number of captives was 493,000. The Bravo packet did not order the Lance to stand down. The Bravo packet said only this: revised intelligence, proceed with caution. It did not say what caution meant. Kestrel read the screen. Vey watched his captain's face and did not know at the time what he was seeing. He thought afterward that he had been watching a man who had already been added to. He thought afterward that he had been watching a man who had 4,011 names in his pocket and had just been handed 493,000 more, and who was being asked to decide whether to add another 2 billion on top of that. Kestrel set the slate down. He thanked Lieutenant Innes for her timely delivery. He told her to return to her station and maintain silent stations and to log the receipt of the Bravo packet in the appropriate book. He did not tell her to stand on the Lance. Innes saluted. She left. Kestrel turned back to Vey. We fire on schedule, Kestrel said. Vey said nothing. The packet says proceed with caution, Kestrel said. It does not amend the order. The order stands. Captain, the order stands, Kestrel said again more softly, and Vey understood then that the man who had been reading 4,011 names every night for 3 years was a man who had decided years ago that the cost of his cross was a number he could carry, and that he would carry any number at all, as long as the fleet asked it of him. Vey took a breath. The Bravo packet revises the intelligence. It does not amend the order, but it revises the basis on which the order was issued. We are not authorized to fire on revised intelligence without consultation. There is no consultation, Kestrel said. We are silent stations. We cannot raise fleet for clarification without breaking silent stations. Breaking silent stations alerts the choir. Alerting the choir loses the firing window. Losing the firing window loses the war. Captain, they said. The order stands, Kestrel said. In the inquiry room, 6 hours later, Rear Admiral Croft folded his hands. Commander Vey, he said. What did you do then? Vey looked at the recording lamp. He looked at the steel of the table. He thought of Sabra Innes, who was 24 years old and who had survived the brevet evacuation as a child, and who had been holding the slate with the Bravo packet on it when she had told him that the burst had been authenticated, and who had not been on the bridge when Vey had given his order. He said, I did nothing then. I sat. I asked the captain if I could pray, and he said yes, and I prayed. The judge advocate's eyes narrowed. You prayed, Vey said. I prayed for 2.5 minutes. I am a man who prays. The captain is also such a man. He waited. When I finished, I stood up and I told him I would obey his order. I told him I would walk to the bridge with him and turn my key when he turned his. I told him I would not raise my voice. And then, Croft said, and then Vey said, I lied. I lied to my captain. I lied to a man I have served under for 2 years. I lied to a man I would have followed into a black hole. I lied because I had decided, in the 2.5 minutes I had told him I was praying, that I was not going to let him kill 493,000 of our own people to win a war. He swallowed. It is the only time I have lied to him, he said. I would like that on the record. The stenographer's fingers moved. 6 hours before the inquiry room on the 3rd deck of the Iron Verdict, Halden Vey walked from the wardroom to the bridge in the steady, measured pace of his captain. He did not run. The crew on the corridor saluted as he passed. He saluted back. He did not look at any of them too long. did not stop at the chapel deck, though he wanted to. He went up the ladder to the bridge, and he passed through the iris door, and he stood at the executive officer's station, and he watched his captain take the command chair. The bridge of the Iron Verdict was 12 meters across. It had a horseshoe of consoles and a central command pit and a viewport that occupied 2/3 of the forward bulkhead. The viewport was dark. They were 600,000 kilometers from the corona of Veilate, and the corona's light was filtered out of the viewport for tactical reasons. There were only the slow points of the Iron Verdict's running lamps, dim red, and the smaller red lamps of the Lance ignition rig along the keel, and one thin band of gold where the corona's edge bled past the filter. 3 officers on the bridge helm, tactical sensors. Innes had been replaced at her own request with her relief and had retired to her quarters, which Vey had ordered. Vey had also, on his own authority, posted a Marine outside her quarters. He had not told the captain about the Marine. He had not told Innes either. Vey took his post. Kestrel did not look at him. "Pre-charge the Lance," Kestrel said. "Pre-charging," Tactical answered. The capacitors began to hum. The hum was a sound that traveled through the deck and through the bulkheads and through the bones of the ship. The hum was a sound that Vey had heard exactly once before in a training exercise 4 years ago, and it had made him cold then, and it made him cold now. The hum meant the keel was preparing to crush a star. The corona of Veilate pulsed in the viewport. "Bring us to firing attitude," Kestrel said. The Iron Verdict turned slowly on her gimbals. Her nose came around. The keel lined up on Veilate. The viewport filter cut the corona's brightness down to a sullen amber band. But Vey could feel the star out there. He could feel it the way you could feel a campfire on the back of your hand when you were standing too close to it. "Lance ready in 2 minutes," Tactical said. Kestrel reached for the safety on his armrest. The safety was a small steel toggle that uncovered the ignition key. The ignition key was a flat brass plate, palm-sized, mounted to the captain's armrest. There was an identical plate on Vey's station. Both had to turn together. They were keyed by thumbprint. They could not be turned by anybody whose thumb was not in the registry, and the registry of the Iron Verdict's Lance had 2 thumbs in it, and those 2 thumbs were Vey's and Kestrel's, and that was the rule. Kestrel flipped the safety. The ignition plate lit up amber. "Stand by, Executive Officer," Kestrel said. Vey put his hand on his ignition plate. The plate read his thumb. The plate lit up amber. The 2 plates blinked together. "Lance ready in 1 minute," Tactical said. The bridge was very quiet. The hum of the capacitors had risen to a sound that Vey could feel in his back molars. The corona pulsed. The Iron Verdict's nose was a black wedge against the amber band. Kestrel said, "On my mark, 3, 2. Vey lifted his thumb from the plate. He turned, very fast, and put his hand on the safety lever of the captain's armrest, and he flipped it closed, and the ignition plate on the captain's chair went dark. Kestrel did not react for 1 full second. He had been a soldier for 22 years, and a captain for 11, and he had not been touched on his own bridge in any of them. His face, in that 1 second, became something that Vey would carry for the rest of his life. Then Kestrel reached for his sidearm. Vey was faster. He had to be. He pulled the captain's sidearm from its holster and stepped back, and put his back to the iris of the ready room, and he raised his voice for the first time that day. "Bridge, this is the executive officer. Captain Rohr Kestrel is hereby relieved of command on grounds of revised intelligence pursuant to Bravo Packet Protocol. Helm, hold attitude. Tactical, dump the Lance capacitors. Sensors, maintain silent stations. Marines to the bridge." Helm did not move. Tactical did not move. Sensors did not move. Kestrel rose slowly from his chair. He was unarmed. He was the most dangerous man in the room. "Belay that order," Kestrel said, in a voice that did not have to be raised. "Lieutenant Brask, dump nothing. Helm, hold attitude. Sensors, maintain Marines. You do not have a captain's call. You have an executive officer's call. The 2 of you decide whose call you take." The Marine sergeant at the bridge hatch, a woman named Pell, who had served under both of them, looked at her boots. The hum of the capacitors continued. In the inquiry room, the judge advocate held up a hand. "Commander," she said, "you used the phrase Bravo Packet Protocol. There is no such protocol in fleet regulations. There is no procedure under which a Bravo packet alone, particularly a Bravo packet that does not amend the order, entitles an executive officer to relieve a captain on his own bridge." "I am aware of that," Vey said. "You invented a protocol." "I invented a protocol. You used your captain's trust in the rule of regulations to lie to him about a regulation." "I did. That is in itself an additional charge." "I am aware of that as well." The judge advocate looked at him. They looked back. He did not look away. After a moment, She nodded at the stenographer and the fingers moved. Continue, she said. The hum of the capacitors continued on the bridge 6 hours before. Tactical did not dump the capacitors. Helm did not hold attitude. The bridge of the iron verdict became, in that moment, a thing that had no center of authority and no clear voice and no engineering doctrine to fall back on, and it became one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy. Kestrel took one step toward Vey. He did not raise his hands. He did not raise his voice. Holden, Kestrel said. He had not called Vey by his first name on duty in 2 years. We have less than 50 seconds. I know, Vey said. 493,000, Kestrel said. I know the number. I read the slate. I read it twice. Do you think I did not read it twice? I know you read it twice. They are dead already, Kestrel said. They are in stasis pods inside the radiance shell of a coronal star. Do you know what happens to a stasis pod inside the radiance shell of a coronal star at coronal maximum? The shell flares. The pods are not built for that flare. They were never going to come out of those pods. The choir put them there because the choir believes we will not fire if there are humans in the shot. The choir is wrong. We will fire. We will fire because 493,000 dead today saves 2 billion of the colonies still living and gives us back the war. I know the number. I have known the number for 15 seconds, and I know it the way I have known the names for 3 years. I will write the new names. I will write them every night. Move out of my way. Vey did not move out of his way. Captain, he said. Sir, I will move out of your way. I will move out of your way on one condition. There are no conditions. There is one condition. Kestrel waited. Confirm with sensors that the stasis pods are anchored where the Bravo packet says they are anchored. If they are in the radiance shell, I will turn my key. If they are not in the radiance shell, we have an option you have not considered. I am asking you, sir, to take 20 seconds. Kestrel's eyes flicked briefly to the sensor station. The sensors officer was a man named Heron, whose name Vey had picked up an hour earlier and whose face he had not yet learned. Heron's hands were on his console. Heron was waiting. Kestrel looked back at Vey. He was a man who carried 4,011 names in his pocket. He was about to write the rest in a single act. He had decided long ago that the act was a price he could pay. He had also been, before he was that man, a captain who took 20 seconds when an executive officer asked him to take 20 seconds. He nodded once. He did not turn his back on Vey, but he raised his voice, not loud but clearly, and said, Sensors, confirm anchor position of stasis pods relative to radiance shell. 20 seconds. Heron worked his console. Vey watched the corona pulse. Heron said, Pods do not anchor in the radiance shell, sir. Kestrel's face did not change. Where do they anchor, Mr. Heron? They anchor on the dark side of the spawn, sir, the cold quadrant. They are clear of the lance arc by a wide margin. They will not be vaporized by the lance. They will be vaporized by the secondary cascade when the star opens. The secondary cascade reaches them in approximately 40 seconds after detonation. They are in stasis. They will not feel it. They are alive, sir, in the technical sense for 40 seconds after we fire. Vey saw what he had been waiting to see in his captain's face. It was very small. It was a flicker. It was the flicker of a man who had been told he could not call the people he was about to kill already dead anymore. Kestrel said, 40 seconds is dead. 40 seconds is 40 seconds, Vey said. He did not push, he let it sit. He let his captain look at him over the gap of a meter of decking, with the corona pulsing amber behind them, and the hum of the capacitors in their bones. What is your option, Commander? Kestrel said. In the inquiry room, the judge advocate set down her stylus. You proposed an alternative, she said. Walk me through the alternative. Vey did not answer at once. He thought of his captain's face. He thought of the corona. He thought of the way the bridge had not had a center of authority for 30 seconds, and then when Kestrel asked for the option, had had one again. Captain Rohr Kestrel had been a man that day who would carry any number. He had also been, in the moment that he asked for the option, a man who very desperately did not want to carry the number if a way out existed. The alternative, Vey said, was to put the iron verdict through the spawn at sublight ram speed, on a vector that breached the cold quadrant and cracked the stasis chamber. We would have approximately 6 seconds inside the spawn before structural failure. Our Marines, on 3 deployment lines, would extract the stasis pods through our breach corridor. The lance would not fire. The star would not be opened. The choir command spawn would be destroyed by the ram. The war would not end in 60 days. The war would end when we ended it. The judge advocate watched him. You proposed to ram a battlecruiser through a choir command spawn at sublight, she said. Yes. On the basis of a calculation you performed in 18 seconds. On the basis of a calculation Lieutenant Sabra Innes had performed in the previous 6 hours and forwarded to my station at 0321, sir. She had run the option as a contingency the moment the Bravo packet arrived. She had not been on the bridge when I gave the order because I had ordered her to her quarters. I had ordered her to her quarters because I had wanted her name kept off the bridge log. I had wanted her name kept off the bridge log because I had already decided that I was going to use the option, and I had not wanted Sabra Innes to be charged with what I was about to do. The judge advocate was very quiet for a moment. Did Captain Kestrel agree to the ram? She said. Captain Kestrel agreed to consider the ram. He did not agree to the ram. What changed his mind? I changed his mind, Bay said. He paused. I changed his mind, he said again, by telling him I would take the bridge. On the bridge of the Iron Verdict, 6 hours earlier, Halden Vey lowered the captain's sidearm. He did not return it. He held it loose at his hip, where everybody on the bridge could see it. He did not look away from Kestrel. Sir, he said, I am going to take the bridge. I am not going to do this with you in the chair, because you have been ordered to fire the lance, and you are an officer who obeys his orders, and I will not put you in the position of having to disobey one. I am going to put you in your ready room. I am going to lock the iris. I am going to take command. I am going to drive the Iron Verdict through the spawn. I am going to come back for you when it is done. If I do not come back, the relief column will come back, and they will find you in your ready room with the log of why I locked you in, and you will be held blameless, and you will be returned to Fleet Command, and you will write 493,000 names every night for the rest of your life, and that will be the price of your refusal to commit a war crime. That is the protocol. That is the Bravo Packet Protocol. I made it up 6 minutes ago. I made it up because there was no protocol that fit, and I am an executive officer, and it is my job to invent the protocol when the captain cannot. Kestrel did not move. The corona pulsed. The hum of the capacitors continued. Marines, Vey said. Sergeant Pell, take the captain to his ready room. Use no force. He will walk. Lock the iris from outside. Hold position. Pell looked at her captain. Her captain looked at her. Captain Rohr Kestrel did not say a word. He turned slowly and walked across the bridge of his own ship in the steady measured pace that he had walked for 11 years, and he passed through the iris of the ready room. And he sat down at the desk where he had once written 4,011 names on a folded sheet of paper, and he folded his hands on the desk and he waited. Pell locked the iris. Vey took the command chair. He said, Helm, bring us to ram attitude on the cold quadrant. Tactical, stand down the lance. Charge the breach gel in the marine deployment lines. Sensors. Confirm anchor coordinates. Comms. Marine Command, 3 lines ready in 2 minutes. All decks, this is the executive officer. We are committing the Iron Verdict to a ram action against the choir spawn. Brace for sublight contact in 6 minutes. There will be casualty. There will be living to bring home. Stations, Helm moved. Tactical dumped the capacitors. The hum dropped into the deck like a body falling on a wood floor. The Iron Verdict came about. In the inquiry room, Croft cleared his throat. Commander Vey, he said, walk us through the ram. Vey closed his eyes. He said the ram took 6 minutes and 11 seconds. The first 3 minutes were vector lock. The 4th minute was burn correction. The 5th minute was hull preparation. The 6th minute was the contact. The 11 seconds were inside. What was inside? Croft said. Vey opened his eyes. The cold quadrant of a choir spawn is not a place, Vey said. It is a chamber the size of a city, and it has no horizon, and it has no floor, and it has no ceiling, and it has surfaces. The surfaces are arranged in colonnades. The colonnades are arranged in the patterns of singing. The choir do not have language the way we have language. The choir have a sustained tonal field, and the field has crests, and the crests are anchored to the architecture of the cold quadrant. We did not know that going in. We knew it coming out. You went in, the judge advocate said. We went in, Vey said. We came in the SOS first at sublight with our breach gel boiling along the keel. We hit the wall of the cold quadrant at 4% of light speed. The wall did not give. The Iron Verdict came apart. The bow section, with the breach gel, opened a hole in the wall the size of a city block. The midship section came through the hole behind the bow and decelerated against the architecture inside. The aft section, including the engine block, sheared off and continued on its vector and exited the spawn on the far side, and is presumed to have struck the corona shell of Vale 8 on a delay of approximately 1 hour. We do not know whether it survived that strike. We do not know whether the corona shell breached, We know the choir is not transmitting from Vale 8. We know nothing else. He paused. The room was very quiet. Inside the cold quadrant, he said, we had 11 seconds. The Marines on the 3 deployment lines extracted 461,000 stasis pods. Lieutenant Innes had recalculated the count after she forwarded me the option. Her count was within 4% of the Bravo packet's count. They were aware of every pod. Their lines were rehearsed. The Marines did not need a captain to tell them what to do. They needed a window. We gave them 11 seconds. They used 11 seconds. And the remainder, the judge advocate said, the 32,000 pods that were not extracted, were lost, Vay said. The room was silent. We're lost, he said again. We knew going in that we could not extract all the pods. We knew that the structural failure of the iron verdict would not give the Marines a full window. Lieutenant Innes had projected we would extract somewhere between 380,000 and 470,000. The Marines reached 461,000. They did not stop because they had reached the upper estimate. They stopped because the deck under their feet was no longer there. Croft folded his hands. And you, he said. Vay looked at the recording lamp. I was on the bridge of the iron verdict during the contact, he said. I gave the order to ram. I do not know how the protocol of an inquiry of this type handles a commander who took the bridge in mutiny and then did not survive the action. I do not know whether the protocol charges a survivor on his behalf. I know only that I am not the man on the bridge of the iron verdict during the contact. The man on the bridge of the iron verdict during the contact was Captain Rohr-Kestrel. The judge advocate's stylus stopped. The stenographer's fingers stopped. Rear Admiral Croft, who had not moved through the entire account, leaned forward. Commander, he said, explain that. Vay closed his eyes again. He saw for a moment the iris of the captain's ready room. He saw the small brass key that Sergeant Pell had handed back to him at the 4-minute mark of the ram run-up. He saw his captain's face on the other side of that iris when the iris opened. At the 4-minute mark, they said, I unlocked the iris of the captain's ready room. I did this against the order I had given myself 6 minutes earlier. I did it because I had given the order to ram, and the ram was going to take the bridge of the iron verdict with it, and I was not the captain of the iron verdict, and I was not going to allow myself to die in the captain's chair of a ship whose captain was alive in the next room. He took a breath. I told Captain Kestrel what I had ordered. I told him the lance was dumped. I told him the ram was committed and the vector was locked. I told him the breech gel was hot and the Marines were on their lines. I told him there was no way to abort. I told him that I was relieving myself of command and returning the bridge to him. I asked him to take the chair. I told him I would join the Marines on the 3rd deployment line. I told him I was going down to Deck 9, where the 3rd line was assembling, and I was going to pull stasis pods until the deck fell away. And he did, Croft said. He took the chair, Vay said. He did not say anything to me. He nodded once. He walked past me onto the bridge. He took the chair. He gave the order to commit the ram. He held the iron verdict on her vector for the full 6 minutes. He was on the bridge for the contact. He was on the bridge for the 11 seconds. He was on the bridge when the bow section came apart. He gave the Marines their window. He gave them the 11 seconds because he was on the bridge to hold the ship steady when she should have broken sooner. He held her. He held her with the lance dumped and the bridge crew at their stations and his hand on the helm override, and he held her past the structural rating of the keel because he was the captain of the iron verdict, and he had decided he was going to carry the 493,000 by carrying them out. Vay opened his eyes. I was on the 3rd deployment line at Deck 9, he said. I pulled 41 stasis pods. I am told the Marines on my line pulled 304. I do not remember the last 2 minutes of the ram. The line officer pulled me off the deck when the deck began to come apart. I came out in a Marine extraction tube with the line. The captain did not come out. The captain was on the bridge when the bridge ended. The captain went down with the ship he had refused to fire the lance from. That is the man I lied to. That is the man I locked in his own ready room. That is the man who carried 4,011 names in his pocket every night and decided, when I gave him the choice, that he would rather hold the helm of a dying battlecruiser than write 493,000 more. He folded his hands. The bandage on his left palm itched. He did not scratch it. He held her for the 11 seconds, he said. He held her steady. The Marines pulled 461,000 human beings out of the cold quadrant of acquires, spawned because Captain Rohr-Kestrel was at the helm of a ship that was already coming apart, and he held her. He did not write the names of the 493,000. He took 461,000 of them out by hand. He sacrificed 32,000 he could not reach, and he sacrificed himself, and he sacrificed his crew, and that is how the man you call disgraced ended a war. The room was very quiet. The recording lamp flickered. Vey took a breath. I would like to amend my testimony, he said. I would like to amend it to add that I was wrong in the wardroom 6 hours before the inquiry. I was wrong to believe Captain Kestrel had decided. He had not decided. He was a man who had been carrying 4,011 names for 3 years and was being asked to carry 2 billion, and he had been preparing himself in the way a man prepares himself to carry them. He had not chosen yet. He chose when I gave him the option. He chose the harder thing. I would like that on the record. The judge advocate looked at the stenographer. The stenographer nodded. It is on the record, the judge advocate said. Rear Admiral Croft sat back in his chair. He was an old man. He had served under Kestrel a decade ago when nobody had heard of the choir. He had pinned the Stellar Cross to Kestrel's collar himself at the brevet ceremony, and he had not slept the night before he pinned it. He looked at Vey. Commander, he said. Stand. Vey stood. You are charged with mutiny in time of declared war. You are charged with relieving a captain of his own bridge. You are charged with refusing a firing order. You are charged with disabling an ignition key and locking a captain in his own ready room. You are charged with inventing a protocol that does not exist. You are charged with using your captain's trust to lie to him about a regulation. Do you contest any of these charges? I contest none of them, Vey said. You wish to make a statement before this panel. I have made my statement. Croft nodded. He looked at the judge advocate. The judge advocate looked at the rear admiral on the other end of the table. The rear admiral on the other end of the table looked at the stenographer. The stenographer's fingers were still. It is the determination of this panel, Croft said, that the charges against Commander Halden Vey are factual and uncontested. It is the determination of this panel that the charges against Commander Halden Vey will be remanded to the discretion of the fleet for action at fleet discretion. Until that action is taken, Commander Vey is hereby returned to the active roles. Commander, you will report to the Fleet Assembly at 0800 tomorrow for reposting. You will return Captain Kestrel's sidearm, which I am informed you have continued to carry on your person since the action, to the captain's surviving family. You will be the officer who delivers it. You will deliver it personally. You will deliver it to his daughter. You will tell her what her father did at the helm of the Iron Verdict. You will tell her in your own words. You will not use the words of the citation. The citation will come later. The citation will say the things the citation is allowed to say. You will tell her the things the citation is not allowed to say. Do you accept this duty? I accept this duty, Vey said. You are dismissed. Vey did not move. He stood at attention. He looked at Croft. He looked at the judge advocate. He looked at the stenographer. He looked at the recording lamp, which had not yet been switched off. He had been an officer long enough to know that there were things you said on the record because the record needed to hear them, and not because you wanted to say them, and there were things you said on the record because both of those things were true at once. For the record, he said. The judge advocate nodded. For the record, Vey said. The Iron Verdict pulled 461,000 human beings out of a stasis chamber on the cold quadrant of a choir spawn that was holding them as hostages against a fleet weapon designed to end a war. The Iron Verdict did this without firing the Singularity Lance. The Iron Verdict did this at the cost of 197 of her own crew, including her captain. The choir command spawn was destroyed in the ram. The aft section of the Iron Verdict, on its uncorrected vector, was observed by long-range sensors at 0411 to strike the corona shell of Vale 8 in a manner consistent with secondary breach of the radiance layer. The choir is not transmitting from Vale 8. The choir is not transmitting from any of the 11 dependent systems serviced by the Vale 8 command spawn. The war is in a state for which the fleet does not yet have a word. There are 461,000 human beings in stasis pods on the salvage tender Granite Watch, and they will be revived in Fleet Hospital Orbital 7 over the next 9 days. And the first of them was revived 3 hours ago, and she is 6 years old. And she asked the medical officer if her mother was alive. He paused. I do not know what to do with the woman who asked that question, he said. I know what to do with her name. I am going to write it. I am going to write the names of every one of the 461,000. I am going to write them every night, 10 pages at a time, in alphabetical order. I am going to start tonight. I am going to do this for Captain Kestrel, who carried 4,011 names for 3 years, and who carried 461,000 more for 11 seconds, and who is not here to write any of them." He took a breath. "That is on the record," he said. The judge advocate switched off the recording lamp. Outside, the slow grind of the docking ring of the salt spire kept its hum. The Marines walked Vey from the inquiry room down a long gray corridor and through a hatch and out onto a gallery deck. The gallery deck had a window. The window faced the salvage yard. The salvage tender Granite Watch was moored at the far end of the yard, and the lights of her holds were lit. On the near side of the yard, a black and battered prow section, the bow of the Iron Verdict, hung on rigging that had not yet decided what to do with her. The bow was scarred. The keel armor was peeled back. The lance port was empty. The lance had never fired. The hull was clean of weapons discharge. Vey stood at the window for a long time. The Marines did not hurry him. He thought of his captain. He thought of a young lieutenant named Sabra Innes, who had survived the brevet evacuation as a child, and who had calculated the option in the 6 hours before the Bravo packet arrived, and who had not been on the bridge when the order was given. He had a packet from her in his pocket. She had handed it to him at the salvage tender airlock that morning, and she had asked him not to open it until after the inquiry. He took it out now. He opened it. It was a folded sheet of flimsy. There was a number on it. The number was the count of stasis pods the Marines on the second deployment line had pulled. The number was lower than the first line's count and higher than the third line's count. Under the number was a single line of handwriting. It said, "He let me see them." He opened the iris when he came onto the bridge. He saw me on the third line on the deck 9 feet. He nodded at me. He took the helm. He did not look at me again. He kept the ship steady. Vey folded the flimsy. He put it back in his pocket. He looked once more at the bow of the Iron Verdict hanging in the rigging of the salvage yard. He looked at the empty lance port and the clean hull. He looked at the place where his captain had been when the bridge ended. Then he turned, and he walked off the gallery deck, and he went to find Captain Rohr Kestrel's daughter, and he carried his captain's sidearm to her in his right hand, and the count of names he would write that night in his left, and he did not look at the bandage on his palm, and he did not scratch it. The war ended the next morning at 0914. The fleet did not have a word for the state the war was in. There was no surrender. There was no treaty. There was no broadcast from the choir. There was no broadcast from any system that had been served by the Vale 8 command, Spawn. There was a silence across 1/3 of known choir space, and the silence held, and the silence kept holding, and after 3 days the fleet stopped waiting for it to break, and the fleet ordered a general stand-down, and the colonies sent up their first uncensored civilian broadcast in 11 months, and on the second day of the stand-down a long-range sensor station on the Miravail reported the slow drift of a sheared aft section of a Wrought-class battlecruiser tumbling on an uncorrected vector through the outer dust of Vale 8, scoured clean by the corona's first breath. The hull markings burned away. The fleet recorded the position. The fleet did not recover the aft section. The fleet left her where she fell. It was a quiet end for a ship that had ended a war. There was no salute. There was no broadcast. There was only the long, thin record of a vector and a position and a designation and a name. The name was the Iron Verdict. The vector ran outward from the cold quadrant of a place that was no longer a place. The position kept changing. The designation was retired by general order by the fleet on the morning the war ended. It was the only honor she would receive. It was the honor her captain would have asked for. On the third morning of the stand-down, before he flew out to find Captain Kestrel's daughter, Halden Vey walked the length of the salvage yard alone. He had been given clearance by Rear Admiral Croft, who had wanted him to see the bow section once with no one else around. The yard was cold. The work lamps had been dimmed. The bow of the Iron Verdict hung in the harness rig with her belly toward the deck and her keel exposed, and the lance port was a long black mouth that had never been opened. Vey stood under it for 9 minutes. He did not pray. He had used his prayer 6 hours before the action, and he had used it as a lie, and he had not earned a second one yet. He climbed up the harness ladder to the breech line where the Marines had cut their entry. The breech gel ports were charred. The hull along the breech was peeled like burnt paper. He put his right hand on the plating. It was cold. The plating did not give. He thought of the captain's last order and of how the captain had braced his right hand on the helm rail in the second before the burn, and how the rail under that hand had been the same temperature as the plating under his now. He thought that this was what cold was for. He thought that the ship had been built to hold the cold, and that she had held it. and that she was holding it still. He did not move his hand for a long time. He listened to the yard. The yard was quiet. He could hear the slow tick of the harness rig settling and the far hum of the granite watch, and once distantly the soft chime of a stasis pod cycling down on the tender. He counted the chimes. He counted to 1. He stopped counting. He took his hand off the plating. There was a faint print of warmth left on the alloy where his palm had been, and he watched it fade. And when it was gone, he climbed back down the harness ladder, rung by rung, slowly, the way a man comes down from a high place when he knows he will not go up again. At the foot of the ladder he stood once more and looked up at the empty lance port. He did not salute. The fleet had retired the designation. There was no one left to salute. He nodded once, the way the captain had nodded at Sabra Tints on the third line on the deck 9 feed, and then he walked out of the salvage yard the way he had walked in, alone, with the bandaged palm at his side, and the sidearm under his coat, and the folded flimsy in his pocket, and the count of names he would write, that night already beginning to order itself in his head, alphabetical, the first letter A, the first name a woman from a colony he had never seen. The yard lights came up behind him as he passed the outer hatch. He did not look back. Outside, on the long curving gallery that ran along the spine of the salt spire, the morning shift was changing. Junior officers passed him in the corridor and did not know his face and did not stop. He preferred it that way. At the lift he waited with 3 ratings who were laughing quietly about something he could not hear. And when the lift came, he stepped in with them, and he rode down with them. And when the doors opened on the shuttle deck, he stepped out, and they did not. The shuttle to the orbital was already warming on the pad. He took the window seat. He set the sidearm on his lap, under his folded coat, and he watched the salt spire fall away below, and beyond the spire the long thin shape of the salvage yard, and at the far end of the yard the small dark wedge of the bow of the Iron Verdict, and beyond that nothing, only the slow uncrossed dark where the Veilate quadrant had been, where the silence was still holding, where the war had ended without a word. He thought of his captain at the helm. He thought of the girl who had asked if her mother was alive. He thought of the name at the top of the list, the woman from the colony he had never seen, and he began quietly to write her in his head the way he would write her on the page that night, in ink, in his own hand, the first of 461,000, and the 4,011 before her, and the one before all of them, who had stayed at the helm and kept the ship steady, and let the Marines see the ones they had come for. The shuttle lifted. The yard fell away. The bow of the Iron Verdict became a dark mark against the dimmed lamps, and then a smaller mark, and then no mark at all. Halden Vey closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He carried his captain home the only way that was left to him, name by name, into the morning in his own hand, in ink, on paper, by the light of a single lamp, until the lamp burned down, and the page was full, and the next page waited, and the war that had ended was, at last, beginning to be remembered.